word attention comes from two Latin words, a, meaning to or towards, and tendere, meaning to stretch, implying that in order to know any object of experience, a thought, feeling, sensation or perception, awareness must direct or stretch the light of its knowing away from itself towards that object. Meditation is the reversal of this process. It is the return of awareness from the object to itself. Most people spend their entire day directing or stretching their awareness or their knowing towards objects, towards thoughts, images, feelings, sensations and perceptions. And only get respite from this process in sleep. Meditation is the art of consciously relaxing the focus of attention from objects and allowing awareness to sink backwards or inwards or selfwards towards itself. That is why in this approach, meditation is nothing to do with the directing of attention or the watching of our thoughts or anything like that. It is the very opposite of that. So simply allow your attention to relax backwards, sink inwards towards its source of awareness, rather than directing it outwards towards any object. This relaxing or sinking, falling of the attention from the object backwards to its source of awareness is not something that just happens in one step. It is a gradual sinking of the mind, deeper and deeper into its source of awareness. It's like a wave sinking into the depths of the ocean. And as it does so, it gradually loses its agitation. to a mind that is accustomed to attending continually to objects, this return to its source or essence will seem to require some effort to begin with. And if that is the case, we should make the effort. As the mind sinks deeper and deeper into its essence, less and less effort is required, until at some point awareness comes to rest in itself. And at that point, what we used to think of as the activity of meditation is replaced by simply self-abidance or self-resting. Awareness simply abiding or resting in and as itself. That is the essence of meditation or prayer. In this self-resting or self-abidance, all the limitations that thought and feeling have superimposed upon our essential nature of pure awareness gradually, in most cases, occasionally, suddenly, fall away. And our essential nature of pure awareness is left shining as it is, devoid of limitation. This self-knowledge, awareness is knowledge of itself as it is not a new or an extraordinary experience. It is, in fact, a knowledge that we are all familiar with, but that has been covered over by our knowledge of things. Awareness is knowledge of itself. The simple knowing of our own being is always present in the background of experience. Awareness is always knowing itself. But its knowledge of itself is mixed with, and therefore colored by, its knowledge of things. And as a result, it seems to lose touch with the knowledge of itself. That is why this recognition of our own being is sometimes referred to as a revelation. Revelation from the Latin revelare, meaning to lay bare. The recognition of our own being is not any kind of new knowledge or an extraordinary experience. It is a laying bare, a revealing of what was already known, but seemingly obscured by the clamour of objective experience. This return of attention to its source or essence is referred to in Sanskrit as Atma Vichara, usually translated as self-inquiry or self-investigation. And it culminates in self-abidance or self-resting. It is translated as self-inquiry or self-investigation because it is often initiated by a question such as, who am I? Or what is it that knows or is aware of my experience? Or simply, am I aware? But it is not recommended that we practice self-inquiry or self-abidance 24/7. It is necessary and appropriate to turn awareness outwards again towards objects. This is not a path of the denial of life. Although it starts off as a path of exclusion, that is, the exclusion of all objective experience. At some point we must return to objective experience. We must include all objective experience. So the path of exclusion turns into the path of inclusion. The path of discrimination turns into a path of love. The Vedantic path turns into the Tantric path. people find, at least to begin with, that when they direct awareness towards objective experience again, that awareness's knowledge of itself is obscured. In other words, a conflict is set up between awareness of objects and awareness of awareness. It seems to be either one or the other, but not both at the same time. So the art of the outward-facing path, the return to objective experience, is to be able to attend to all aspects of objective experience again, without losing the knowledge of our own being. We don't lose ourselves in the dream of experience. We remain awake in the dream. So in the first step in this approach, we turn our attention away from objects. That is, awareness ceases to direct itself towards objects and it comes to rest in itself. But in the second step, we begin to include objective experience again. So turn your attention again towards objective experience. Just to begin with, towards your thoughts. Become aware of the stream of thoughts. It doesn't matter what their content is. But don't lose yourself to the thoughts. Know yourself as that which knows them. See that the thought doesn't just appear to you, it appears within you awareness. So allow yourself to first visualize and then feel that you are a space-like presence of awareness, within which a flow of thoughts is appearing. Be knowingly that space-like presence, and be totally open to the stream of thoughts, whatever their content. When I say be open to the stream of thoughts, I don't mean to imply that being open to the thoughts is something you have to practice. The space-like presence of awareness is, by definition, already open to the stream of thoughts. No effort is required. Awareness's nature is openness without resistance. Therefore, there is no question of practicing acceptance or welcoming or anything like that. Now, notice that we never actually experience a thought in the way it is conceived as a well-defined, discrete object. Thought is not really like a fish in the ocean. It is more like a current in the ocean. So the concept a thought doesn't refer to anything that we actually experience. It would be more accurate, but not completely accurate, to refer to a process of thinking rather than an object called thought. So drop the label thought and see that there is a process of thinking appearing in the space-like presence of awareness. And see that just as there is less distinction between a current in the ocean and the ocean than there is between a fish and the ocean, so there is less distinction between the process of thinking and the field of awareness than there is between a thought and awareness. In other words, we are beginning to merge the distinction between the object and the space of awareness. See if you can find a clearly defined border or edge to the process of thinking. A border that separates thinking from the field of awareness in which it appears. It's like trying to find a clearly defined border to a current in the ocean. Now, having seen that an object called a thought never really exists as such, but is rather a process of thinking, we explore more deeply what thinking is really made of. Thinking must be made of something, and if we are experiencing thinking, we must be experiencing what it is made of. Ask yourself the question, in my actual experience, is there anything to thinking other than the knowing of it? The consciousness of it, the awareness of it. Is there any part of thinking that is distinct from knowing? In fact, when I say, is there anything to thinking other than the knowing of it, I imply that knowing is one thing and it is another. See that we never find the it. We never find thinking apart from knowing. In other words, knowing is all there is to thinking. Just as the current is not a discrete object within the ocean, but is only a temporary modulation of the ocean itself. So thinking is not a discrete object within awareness or pure knowing. It is a modulation of awareness itself. Awareness or knowing is the only substance present in thinking. Just as the current gives the ocean a temporary name and form, and therefore an apparent limitation, so thinking gives awareness a temporary name and form, and thus an apparent limit. Now we do the same experiment with our experience of the world. Take whatever sound is present and see that that sound doesn't just appear to awareness, it appears in awareness. Keep your eyes closed to begin with for this. And see that we never actually experience a discrete object with a clearly defined border called a sound, but rather we experience the process of thinking. So the concept sound is a very inaccurate label that doesn't actually describe our experience. The sound is just the experience of hearing. So hearing is like a current in the ocean. See if you can find a clearly defined edge to the experience of hearing that separates it from the field of awareness in which it appears. Listen to the faint sound of the aeroplane. Is there anything to that sound other than hearing? And then ask yourself the question, is there anything, any substance present in hearing other than knowing? eyes to open. The sight of the world appears. In fact, can we be sure that it is the sight of the world and not simply just a sight, a perception? It is a perception, but we cannot be sure it's a perception of a world, because we never come in contact with that world other than our current perception of it. So drop the label of the world. All we know is the current perception. It's not a perception of something. We never find the something. It's just a perception. Close your eyes. That perception has vanished. Open your eyes. A new perception has appeared. Anything that vanishes and appears must vanish and appear in something. What does the current perception appear in? Don't say space. Space is itself part of the current perception. In your actual experience, where is the current perception appearing, or in what is the current perception appearing? Don't be too quick to answer that question. Feel that in which the current perception is appearing. See that the current perception is appearing in the only place where it is possible for anything to appear. That is in consciousness or in awareness. And see that the current perception, the current sight in this case, is not a static object. It's not possible to have a static perception. All perceptions are continually moving and changing, albeit sometimes very subtly. In other words, we don't actually experience something called a perception. A perception is a concept that doesn't refer to something that is actually experienced. It would be more accurate to say we experience a flow of perceiving, in this case a flow of seeing. So drop the label sight or perception. See that you are experiencing, or rather that seeing, the process of seeing, is appearing in you, awareness. And now ask yourself the question, what is the experience of seeing actually made of? If we are experiencing seeing, we must be experiencing what it is made of. So all that is necessary is to reach out your imaginary hand and touch the stuff that seeing is made of. What is that? What is really there? When you touch the current in the ocean. We could ask the question the other way round. Is there anything to seeing other than the knowing of it? In fact, not the knowing of it. We never find the it. We never find the current. When we reach out our hand, all we find is water. All there is to seeing is knowing. So now there is no question of having to choose either between awareness or objects. Because the apparent distinction between awareness and its object, the thought, the sound, the sight, has dissolved. In fact, it hasn't dissolved. It was never really there to begin with. But it seemed to be there because we imagined that it was there. When we look closer, we see it was never there to begin with. Experience is always one thing. It is never two things. It is never awareness plus an object, self plus an other, mind and matter. The experience is always one thing. And if we make a deep investigation into the reality of that one thing, we find that it is not a thing. All that is there is knowing. That one thing which is not a thing cannot legitimately be given a name, because all names describe things. And hence the ancient sages in their wisdom and humility simply said, reality is not two. They were too respectful of reality to call it one. They knew that to say reality is one is too much. It is safer simply to say it is not two. Advaita. allow your eyes to close. And allow the experience of the body to come to your attention. Drop the label body without reference to thought or memory. We would have no idea that what we are currently experiencing is something called a body. It is simply a sensation or a series of sensations appearing in awareness. So for those of you that are new to this, I want to make absolute certain that you understand exactly what I mean by a sensation. The sound of this voice is not a sensation, it's what I call a perception. The sight of this room is a perception, not a sensation. The tingling sensation of your feet on the floor or of your hands on your lap is a sensation. The experience of warmth or cold is a sensation. A toothache is a sensation. The experience of hunger or thirst is a sensation. So pay no attention for the time being to your thoughts and sounds and sights if your eyes are open, although I recommend keeping your eyes closed. Just allow the current sensation or series of sensations to come to your attention, and just isolate a series of sensations, the sensation of the tingling sensation at the soles of your feet. Your legs on the chair or floor. The tingling sensation of your hands. The sensation of your face or behind your eyes. Take some time to see in your experience that these sensations are appearing in awareness. Contrary to millennia of conditioning that has told us that awareness appears in these sensations, that is, in the body, it is our actual experience that these sensations are appearing in awareness. To some of you that will be obvious. To others it may take some time for the strength of the conditioning to recede and for the truth of your experience to become clear. See that it's not a sensation of a body. The idea of a body is added by thought. If we were newborn infants, that is, if we had no knowledge of thought or memory, we would have no idea that the current sensation or flow of sensations were sensations of a body. They are just sensations. Be like a newborn infant in the sense that we don't refer to memory or images or thoughts. Refer only to your current direct experience. Sensations appearing in awareness. Now, let's look a little bit closer at these sensations. Can you find a discrete, well-defined object called a sensation with a clearly defined border or shape? Can you find a static object called a sensation? Or is a sensation more like a pulsating, vibrating, sensing? See that no actual object called a sensation ever crystallizes out of awareness. So drop the label sensation. It doesn't accurately describe our experience. The word sensation is a crude placeholder for something that is never actually experienced. The actual experience of the body is more like a tingling, vibrating, pulsating, sensing. First understand, then visualize, and finally feel that the so-called body is experienced as a pulsating, vibrating, sensing, a ripple in awareness. Now ask yourself the question, what is this pulsating, rippling, vibrating, sensing made of? Reach out your imaginary hand, made only of sensitivity, made only of knowing, and touch the stuff this sensing or vibrating is made of. Does the knowing, which investigates the sensing, find anything other than itself? Does the ocean that investigates the current find anything other than water? Our only knowledge or experience of the body is sensation. All there is to sensation in our experience is sensing. And the only substance present in sensing is knowing. Our only experience of the world is perception, That is, sights, sounds, tastes, textures and smells. All there is to perception in our experience is perceiving. And the only substance present in perceiving is knowing. All there is to the mind are thoughts and images. Our only knowledge of thoughts and images are thinking and imagining. And the only substance present in thinking and imagining is knowing. See that knowing or consciousness is the only substance that is ever actually known or experienced. Try now to find something in your experience, in your current experience, your remembered experience, your imagined experience. That is made of anything other than knowing. Imagine a vision of God, a near-death experience, a deep depression, a moment of ecstasy, or simply the taste of tea. Is there anything to any of these experiences? Could there be anything to any of these experiences, or indeed to any experience, other than knowing? And ask yourself the question, what is it that knows the experience of knowing? Is it known by itself, or is it known by something other than itself? Can you find anything other than knowing with which knowing could be known? Wherever we look in experience, there is only knowing. It is knowing that knows this knowing. Ask yourself the question, is this knowing ever divided into parts? If knowing were divided into parts, there would have to be something within knowing, other than knowing, with which it could be divided. In just the same way that in order to divide the space of this room, we would have to build a wall through the middle of this room, made out of something other than the space. Is there anything in empty space with which empty space could be divided? Space cannot divide space. Is there anything in knowing other than knowing, with which knowing could be divided into parts? See that this knowing is indivisible. There is nothing in itself with which it could be divided or limited, and therefore it is unlimited or infinite. This knowing is not something foreign to ourself. It is our very own self, the only self, if we can call it a self, there is. This single, infinite, intimate, indivisible whole or self admits no other self or entity within itself. No separate object or self ever comes into existence. Existence from the Latin ex, meaning out of, and sistere, meaning to stand. No object or self ever exists or stands out from this infinite, intimate, indivisible knowing with its own independent existence. There are no real objects or selves. It is not blasphemous to say, I am the infinite, perfect whole. In other words, it is not blasphemous to say, I am God's infinite being. It is blasphemous to say, I am a separate self. That is the true blasphemy. Because to consider oneself a self, a separate individual, is to deny the omnipresence of the infinite whole. There is no room for the finite in the infinite. There is no room in God's infinite being for anything other than itself. To assert the existence of a separate self or an object is to deny the reality of God's infinite being. When Ramana Maharshi was asked by his devotees if he would like to take a tour round India, speaking to people in various parts of the country, he said, "What's the point? I never see anything." He didn't mean literally, I don't see appearances. But his vision was completely equal. He only ever experienced one thing. And traveling around India would give him no further experience of that one thing than he experienced at home in Arunachala. His vision was even, equal, knowing, only knowing. In the early stages of our investigation on the inward-facing path, objective experience seems to be a distraction from reality. Objective experience, thinking, feeling, sensing, perceiving, seems to veil the reality of pure knowing or God's infinite being. And therefore we have to turn away from it. But in the more advanced stages of our exploration, in the outward-facing path, there is no question of being distracted from pure knowing. If there is nothing in experience other than pure knowing, what could distract us from this knowing? What would be the need for the focusing of our attention, the resisting of any experience or the accepting of any experience? In the more advanced stages of this investigation, objective experience is not a distraction or an obscuration of reality. It shines with reality. Every experience announces, celebrates, indicates God's infinite being. This is why Krishnamurti, when asked towards the end of his life, "What is your secret?" he simply said, "I don't mind what happens." His students were expecting some marvelous new teaching. He just said, "I don't mind what happens." That was his secret. I see the same thing in all experience. A vision of God, a deep depression, a moment of ecstasy, the taste of tea. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. Knowing, knowing only knowing. It's why, sorry, I can't resist this. It's why when William Blake was asked by one of his friends, "When you see the sun rise, do you not see a round disk of fire somewhat like a guinea?" And he replied, "Oh, no, no, no. I see an innumerable company of the heavenly host crying, 'Glory, glory, glory is the Lord God Almighty.'"